The evening sun cast long shadows over the quaint suburban house, as Stephanie nudged a plate of salad towards the young man sitting at their dining table. "Frank, try the salad and don't be shy," she urged, her eyes gleaming with warmth. Frank, their important guest, smiled appreciatively, taking a bite. "Thank you, Stephanie. Everything is delicious," Frank said, his tone polite and sincere. Alex, Stephanie's husband, rubbed his hands together in excitement. "We should celebrate such good news," he exclaimed, heading to the bar to retrieve a bottle of expensive whiskey. "I've been saving this for a special occasion. Tonight, we celebrate meeting our future son-in-law." As Alex began to pour the whiskey into glasses, Frank quickly covered his glass with his hand. "Thank you, Alex, but I don't drink alcohol," he said, shaking his head. "Frank's an athlete, Dad," Stacy interjected with a frown. "He doesn't drink at all," Alex shrugged, a bit taken aback. "An athlete, huh? Do you have a drinking problem?" Frank laughed lightly. "No, not at all. I've been boxing since I was 7, and I go to the gym a few times a week. I just choose not to drink." Alex nodded in respect. "I get it. If you're an athlete, then it makes sense. I respect that." Dinner continued smoothly, with Stephanie and Alex growing increasingly fond of Frank. Frank and Stacy had met at work, where he was an administrator and she was a newly graduated job applicant. Frank had offered to help Stacy with work matters, their professional relationship blossoming into a deep friendship and, eventually, love. They discovered they shared many interests, such as traveling, outdoor activities, and a belief in love at first sight. 6 months into their relationship, they decided to move in together. Their lives intertwined seamlessly, with Frank and Stacy sharing household chores and planning their weekends together. They often took short trips to explore new places, and had even traveled abroad. Now, Stacy's parents were meeting Frank for the first time. Stephanie and Alex had prepared a sumptuous dinner, and were eager to get to know their daughter's boyfriend. They were curious about Frank's background, but Stacy hadn't shared much about his family. After dinner, as they sat in the living room, Alex couldn't help but probe. "Frank seems like a decent guy, Stacy. But are you sure he didn't have a drinking problem? It's unusual for someone his age not to drink at all." Stacy sighed. "Dad, I've told you, Frank is an athlete. He enjoys an active lifestyle and is very disciplined. He's never had a drinking problem." Alex squinted, still skeptical. "Well, okay, but what about his family? What do you know about them?" Stacy hesitated. "I haven't met them yet. Frank doesn't talk much about his family. All I know is that he comes from a small town in a neighboring state, and he has siblings." Stephanie, who had been quietly listening, frowned. "That's very suspicious. Are you sure he's not hiding something?" Alex waved her off. "I'm sure he's not hiding anything. He's probably just embarrassed because his family is poor." "Stacy, you're from a wealthy family, and he's had to achieve everything on his own. Don't look for secrets where there are none." Stacy nodded, though she felt uneasy. Frank had never been forthcoming about his family, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. As the months passed, Frank and Stacy continued to live happily together. They decided to get married, but wanted a modest celebration instead of an extravagant wedding. Frank suggested they save money for a wedding trip and a house. One evening, Frank announced he was going on a business trip. "Stacy, do you want to come with me?" Stacy shook her head. "No, Frank, I have no desire to go anywhere this time. I'll stay home and finish my reports." Frank kissed her forehead. "I'll miss you." The next morning, Frank left for his trip. Stacy, however, had different plans. After seeing Frank off, she took a day off work, hired a cab, and headed to the train station. From there, she drove to a neighboring state, determined to uncover the truth about Frank's family. 4 hours later, Stacy arrived at a small, dilapidated town by a lake. The town looked almost abandoned, with many houses destroyed and overgrown with weeds. She stopped at a shabby store with a crooked sign, hoping to find directions. Inside the store, a woman in her 40s with bright red lipstick and messy curly hair was stocking shelves. "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to this address?" Stacy asked, showing her the note with Frank's home address. The woman squinted at the address. "Are you here to see Karen? Turn left behind the store and go down the street." Stacy nodded, thanking the woman. As she walked away, the woman called out, "If you're looking for Karen, you better hurry." She stops being coherent after lunch. Stacy hurried to the address, her heart pounding. The house she found was in terrible condition, with broken windows and a neglected yard. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. "Karen," she called out, feeling a sense of dread. A disgruntled voice replied from around the corner. "Who's there? Go away." A hunched, skinny woman with long arms and a puffy face emerged. She wore a dirty, ragged dress and old shoes. "What do you want?" "I won't pay for the electricity. I don't have any money." "I'm not here about the electricity," Stacy said gently. "I'm Frank's fiancé. I just wanted to meet his family." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Frank's fiancé, huh? Well, you wasted your time coming here. Frank doesn't have a family worth meeting." As Karen spoke, a young girl of about 12 appeared, clutching an old smartphone. "Mom, don't sell my phone." Karen lunged at the girl. "Give me the damn phone, Helen. I need it for money." Helen dodged her mother, running towards Stacy. "I won't give it to you. You'll just buy booze." Stacy stepped between them. "Helen, why don't we go for a walk? Let your mother be." Helen nodded, leading Stacy away from the house. They walked to a nearby lake, where Helen finally spoke. "You shouldn't have come here. Frank was trying to protect you." Stacy's heart ached. "Tell me about your family, Helen." Helen sighed. "Our mother had 4 children. Samantha, Frank, Nick, and me. Samantha got married at 16 and has 2 kids. Her husband is a heavy drinker, and they fight constantly. Nick was murdered by our mother's lover, Bobby, when he tried to protect her. Frank hasn't forgiven himself for not being there." Stacy listened, horrified. "Why didn't Frank take you with him?" Helen looked down. "He said he had too much work and couldn't take care of me. But he sends me money and promised to help me go to college." Tears welled in Stacy's eyes. She had no idea Frank's past was so dark. "Thank you for telling me, Helen." When Stacy returned home, she confronted Frank. "Why didn't you tell me about your family?" Frank looked away, pain etched on his face. "I didn't want you to see that part of my life. It's too painful." Stacy hugged him tightly. "We should invite Helen to live with us. She needs to get out of that place." Frank agreed, and they began the process of taking custody of Helen. They had a small, intimate wedding with only close friends and family, including Helen. After the wedding, Stacy and Frank took Helen shopping for school supplies and new clothes. They visited Nick's grave together, finding closure and peace. Night slowly fell over the small town, bringing with it a sense of unease. While Helen slept in the next room, Stacy and Frank sat in the living room, lost in thought. Stacy held Frank's hand, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I never wanted you to know this, Stacy," Frank murmured, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I wanted to protect you from this pain." Stacy squeezed his hand, looking deeply into his eyes. "Frank, we're partners in this life. I want to share everything with you, even the hardest moments. We'll get through this together." Frank sighed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I just wanted you to see the good part of me, not the chaos of my past." "You're an amazing man, Frank," Stacy said firmly. "What you've been through has only made you stronger and more compassionate. And now, we're going to take care of Helen and give her the life she deserves." In the following days, Helen's life changed dramatically. She enrolled in a new school, where Stacy helped her with homework, and Frank encouraged her to get involved in extracurricular activities. Helen, though still haunted by the past, began to flourish in her new environment. One afternoon, while Stacy and Helen were shopping for school supplies, Helen looked up at Stacy and asked, "Do you think I'll ever feel normal, like other kids?" Stacy smiled, holding her hand. "Helen, there's no such thing as normal. Each of us has a unique story. What matters is how we choose to move forward and make the best of what we have." Helen nodded, feeling a new kind of hope growing inside her. "I'll do my best. I want to be strong like Frank." Stacy felt warmth in her heart upon hearing this. Frank had been a model of strength and resilience for Helen, and now she was beginning to be inspired by him as well. As the months passed, the small family began to stabilize. Frank continued to work diligently, always finding time to be with Stacy and Helen. They spent weekends exploring parks, hiking, and even traveling to nearby towns to show Helen new places. On one of these trips, while browsing through a craft fair, Helen found a sketchbook. "Can I have this?" she asked Frank timidly. Frank smiled, seeing the excitement in her eyes. "Of course, Helen. Do you like to draw?" Helen nodded. "I've always liked it, but I never had much time or materials." Stacy joined them, looking at the blank pages of the sketchbook. "Let's buy some colored pencils too. I want to see your artwork," Helen beamed, and thus, a new chapter began for her. The nights once filled with nightmares were now occupied by hours of drawing and creativity. Stacy and Frank hung her drawings around the house, creating an improvised gallery that filled the home with color and joy. However, not everything was perfect. The presence of Karen, Helen, and Frank's mother, still lingered like a shadow. Karen often called, asking for money or causing trouble. Frank felt a conflicting responsibility to help his mother, but he also knew she needed professional help that he couldn't provide. One night, after one of these disturbing calls, Frank sat next to Stacy on the bed, his head in his hands. "I don't know what to do anymore. She'll never change, and it's affecting us." Stacy placed her hand on his shoulder, offering comfort. "Maybe it's time to consider a more serious intervention. There are places where she can get help, but she needs to want it." Frank shook his head, exasperated. "She'll never want it. She's so deep in her own misery." Stacy thought for a moment. "What if we talked to Samantha? Maybe together we can do something." Frank hesitated, but knew Stacy was right. The next day, he called his sister Samantha, explaining the situation. Samantha agreed that something needed to be done. A few days later, Frank, Samantha, and Stacy met at Karen's house. The house was in an even worse state, the smell of alcohol and despair filling the air. Karen sat on the sofa, a bottle of vodka beside her. "Karen," Frank began, his voice firm, "we're here because we care about you. You need help." Karen looked at them, her eyes clouded. "I don't need your help. I don't need anything." Samantha approached, kneeling beside her mother. "Mom, please, look at us. We want you to get better, to have a better life." Karen laughed bitterly. "You think you can fix this? It's too late for me." Stacy joined them, speaking softly. "Karen, it's not too late. There are places you can go, where people are willing to help you recover." Karen looked at Stacy, her anger starting to fade. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "I care because you're the mother of the man I love," Stacy replied. "And because Helen needs you. She needs to know you're okay." For a moment, silence hung over the room. Then, with a deep sigh, Karen let the bottle fall. "What do I have to do?" They helped Karen enroll in a rehabilitation program, a place where she could get the help she needed to recover from her addiction. Although the road was long and difficult, they all knew it was a step in the right direction. With Karen out of immediate danger, the family began to find a new balance. Helen, growing more confident, excelled in school and extracurricular activities. Her drawing started to gain recognition, and an art teacher suggested she consider a career in the field. Stacy and Frank, in turn, continued to build a solid and loving life. They finally bought a house, a place that quickly became a home filled with laughter and love. Helen had her own room, decorated with her artistic creations, and an improvised studio where she could continue to develop her talent. One day, while in Helen's studio, Stacy found a drawing that made her stop. It was a portrait of Helen, Frank, Stacy, and Karen, all together and smiling. The drawing captured hope and the possibility of redemption, something Stacy knew they were all seeking. "This is beautiful, Helen," Stacy said, moved. Helen smiled shyly. "I wanted to draw something that showed what I feel. That, despite everything, we're still a family." Stacy hugged Helen, feeling a deep gratitude for finding her own strength through the challenges they faced together. As the months turned into years, the family saw many changes. Karen completed the rehabilitation program and began to rebuild her life, one step at a time. Samantha and her husband also sought help, working to create a more stable environment for their children. Helen continued to thrive, eventually earning a scholarship to an art school. She moved to the big city, but always kept in touch with Stacy and Frank, frequently visiting and sharing her achievements. On one of these visits, while walking through the park, Helen looked at Frank and Stacy with a smile. "I could never have done it without you. You gave me a new life." Frank hugged Helen, emotion clear in his eyes. "You did all the hard work, Helen. We were just here to support you," Stacy agreed, feeling the pride and love she had for Helen grow even more. "You are an inspiration to all of us, Helen." Life continued, with its challenges and victories, but always with the love and resilience that the small family had built. Frank and Stacy, now with gray hair, felt grateful for every moment they shared, knowing they had overcome the past to create a bright future full of possibilities. As they watched the sunset on the horizon, Frank held Stacy's hand. "We made it, didn't we?" Stacy smiled, leaning in for a soft kiss. "Yes, we did. And the best is yet to come." And so, with each other's unwavering support, Frank and Stacy continued to write their story, a story of love, resilience, and hope, knowing that together they could face anything life